Hey, this is Alyssa, and I'll be presenting my ecology project for the Tuesday lab. For my project, I went to Panther Creek State Park, and for the first trip, it was taken on March the 6th, and the temperatures that day were 55 degrees for the high, and the low was 45. It was overcast for that day, and it was still kind of chilly. For trip 2, it was taken April the 24th, and the high was 64 and the low was 54 degrees, so it was slightly warmer that time around, but it was raining when I went out, and it was also overcast for most of the day. While I was there, I ran across some wildlife, mostly bugs, but there were a few exceptions, like the eastern worm snake. He was found under a rock, and these eastern worm snakes actually live mostly under logs and leaf debris when they're not underground. They eat mostly earthworms, bugs, slugs, and anything that they can really get in their mouth. They're a really small snake, and they are also non-venomous. The next thing that I found was an earthworm. The earthworm is an herbivore, and according to National Geographic, they are vital to soil health because they transport nutrients and minerals from below to the surface via their waste, and the tunnels aerate the ground. The next thing I found was this centipede. I didn't get a close enough look to figure out what kind of centipede it was. I just figured out that it was a centipede. And the next one that I found was the brown garden snail. There was actually several of these on both trips. The snail is known to be a herbivore, but it also feeds on decaying matter. The next things that we ran across were fungus. We ran across the shelf fungi, and the photograph on the left as well as the right was actually the same log. The one on the left was taken on the first trip, and the one on the right was taken on the second trip. The shelf fungus thrives off of decaying trees and other decaying matter, and they serve as an important decomposer to forests. The next thing that we ran across was the crustose lichen. It was one of the more common lichens that we ran across. It demonstrates the relationship between algae and fungi. The next thing I found was this little mushroom. They are important decomposers to the environment, and they help to break down the decaying matter. And I also found this other kind of mushroom that was directly next to it. It is a different kind of mushroom, but they serve the same purpose. They both feed on decaying material and help to be a decomposer to the environment. The next thing that we ran across was a bunch of plants. In Panther Creek State Park, they have a wide variety of different kinds of foliage. One of the things that we ran across a lot was the wood anemone. The picture on the left was from trip 1, and the picture on the right was from trip 2. The next thing that we found a lot of was the eastern red cedar. There wasn't much of a difference between the first time that we went and the second time that we went due to the kind of bouncing in weather that we had. So they still didn't develop very many leaves between the first trip and the second trip. The next thing that was in abundance was moss. And moss is a pioneer species that helps new soil by breaking down material with acid that's found in their roots. The second trip around, we found a lot more moss than the first trip, but it had also been raining as well as was raining on the second trip. The next one that we ran across was called lamb's ear, and we found it on trip 1, but didn't find it again on trip 2. Most of the plants that we found were along the edge of the trail, so it was probably either removed or eaten by one of the animals. Here is the next plant, and it's the violet wood sorrel, and it was also found along the edge of the trail. And it was found the first time, but not the second time. So again, it was probably either removed or eaten by another animal. This was a plant that I found on the second trip. It's the squaw root. And at first I thought it was little pine cones until I got a closer look and found that it was actually a plant. And in this picture you can see kind of the difference in growth between this little sprout on trip 1 and trip 2. On trip 2 you can see that it had like a little bit more growth and it was starting to grow new little segments to it. You can kind of see the same thing with this grass plant. In trip 2 it was a lot more lush and had a lot more green to it. And here was a bush that was at the trailhead, and you can see the difference in growth between trip 1 and trip 2 and how it almost doubled in size within the month that we were there. And here are some other photographs of other plants that I found along the trail and throughout the trip. All of these things kind of come together to make the ecosystem what it is, and they all play a very important, although different, part in the environment. And that is all.